Okay, good morning. Um, I have a lot to share today. I have a lot more to share than I have time, and I say that every week, but this week I really mean it. Um, Excuse me one second here. I'm trying to pull up something that I need to refer to later in my talk. There is, as we say each week, there is a enormous convergence of events, of things that are happening. Um, each week, I'm hopeful that I'll get through more than I have time for, and then um, as I'm preparing, I keep finding other things, and as I've said before, I think I have prophecy ADD just because of all the different things that are happening, and sometimes it's hard to organize it and make it into a coherent um, something that flows so you can understand um, what's going on. And the problem is, in large part, is that everything's connected to everything else. And so here I am. I'm trying to find an article that I may not even get to it. So please forgive me here for a second. Why does this not show up on my... Okay, the Jerusalem Post needs to reorganize its iPad app. I'm looking for the opinion page. Well, I guess I'll just refer to it later. Goodness gracious, what did they do to this thing? Yeah, they improved it. I just leave it alone for, I mean, isn't it, you get used to something in I mean, I get some training on some software this week, and it's like you get used to something, and it's like somebody to justify their existence has to make a minor change that changes everything that you do. So, okay, well, let's go because this is boring. This was an article in USA Today about a week and a half, well, I guess on October 4th. And I think this pretty much sums it up. This is a secular source, and I don't remember if and part of the other problem too is every now and then somebody will send me an email and say, boy, you should really talk about this. And I'm like, well, I talked about that 2 weeks ago. Obviously, you didn't listen. And then sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, did I talk about this already? Because I don't even remember what I talked about. So I should have very low expectations that you're going to remember what I talk about. But this is I'm seeing these conversations a lot more, even outside of church, even outside of prophecy conferences and that sort of thing, where people are talking about what's going on in the world. Everything seems to be out of control. And then there are these things that we've really never seen before. For example, here is a collision. I think this is two stars colliding that they took a picture of. And there are things that are happening there that they've just never seen before. And we're seeing them now because of the high definition cameras and telescopes and that sort of thing. We talk about the things that happen in our country, and I focus a lot on the United States because obviously I live there and I live here. And so I'm not ignoring what's going on elsewhere. But the things that are happening in the United States, everybody keeps talking about, and I mentioned this last week, it's unprecedented. We've never seen this before. The fires in California, up in the wine country in Northern California, and elsewhere, thousands of homes were just reduced to rubble. We see the shooting in Las Vegas, which seems like it was, what was it, 3 weeks ago today that happened, and it seems like it was like 4 months ago, because and I don't think I'm exaggerating, because of all the things that have happened in between. And then there are things like this that are happening, that we've never seen before. And Scripture does tell us that there is coming a time when there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And it also talks about things going on the earth that'll cause people's hearts to fail because of fear. And so as we get closer to that time, we're going to see these things really begin to ramp up. But this is Portugal. They have massive fires in Portugal and Spain. Spain's in major turmoil. They're taking over, I want to say Catalonia, Barcelona, that area, because they want to separate from Spain, and Spain doesn't want them to separate. In Austria, there was a 31-year-old that was elected as the new president or premier. And he's from they call him, I don't know if they say he's from the far right, but he leans to the right. So in a lot of media, they'll call him far right. I don't really know what he stands for, but certainly they think that Austria is going to shift to the right. And he's about nationalism. You know, he's a nationalist. He wants to protect Austrian national ideals. And this is very upsetting to people. There are things that I don't even have time to put in, like Bush 43 goes and makes a speech this week about how Trump is destroying the new world order, the global order. Surprisingly, this morning in the New York Times, there's actually an editorial/interview with Jimmy Carter. And I will tell you, surprisingly, Jimmy Carter sounds very supportive of Trump in some respects. And he's volunteered to go help with diplomacy things if he can. And he just says, look, it wasn't Trump's fault that everything's melting down with North Korea. At least that's what I understood from the quick review I made of the editorial. It's in the editorial page of today's New York Times, which is like Jimmy Trump is supporting Donald Trump. It really is the end of time. And there's all these divisions that are going on in the church, and it's very, I will say it's very distressing to watch it all happen. For example, this week we saw this, and it's not really about this, but it is kind of about this. There's a couple articles from the New Yorker, which is a left-wing magazine. We all know that. But, President Trump was severely criticized by this congresswoman from Florida who said that he had been very insensitive to this family of a man killed in Niger that in an ambush. And he didn't say the right things, and he's insensitive, he's rude. General Kelly came out and really laid her out the congresswoman, in pretty unmistakably clear terms. He himself having lost a son in Afghanistan. We had the protests going on in the NFL. I'm not sure what we call this congresswoman. Elizabeth Warren, who claimed that she's 164th Cherokee, a lot of us have referred to her as Pocahontas, F-A-U-X, Pocahontas. So I suggest maybe this congresswoman should be called Annie Folkley or something like that. F-A-U-X-L-E-Y, K-L-E-Y, well, however you say it. But the response of the New Yorker when Kelly came out and defended President Trump was to say, this is what a military coup looks like. And the problem is that everybody's running around completely unhinged, not able to reason about things. And I see this across the board. I see it in church circles. I see it in Bible prophecy circles. And it is I suppose I could have called this last days madness, because it seems like people are really losing their minds. And it's very concerning. And in some cases, because if it is the time that I think it is, that a lot of us think it is, you're just seeing the front end of this, and you need to get a grip. My wife is a good advisor, so I don't know. Well, here's the other thing that the New Yorker says, is if you think Trump is bad, what would happen if we got Michael Pence into office? And because he's worse, he's a corporatist and he's more religious than Trump, and he's essentially the Taliban, is essentially what they're arguing on the left. There's this, I'm sort of, if I act like I'm at a loss for words, I am at a loss for words. And you should make note of the date and time that John Haller was at a loss for words. Here's an example. This is a Ben Shapiro article in the Daily. This article from the Weekly Standard this is by Ben Shapiro. And he talks about a professor at Boise State. Now, Boise State, they have the blue football field. And some years they have a pretty good football team that plays on a blue football field. And this professor named Scott Yenor is being subjected to a witch hunt. Here's what the opening sentence says. A political science professor at Boise State writes a piece about transgenderism, and the university tries to tie him to the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville. And he's up on charges. They want to get rid of this professor. He wrote a kind of academic article in First Principles, which is published by the Heritage Foundation, called Sex, Gender, and the Origin of the Culture Wars in Intellectual History. And then there was an article that he had written in the Daily Signal about 2 months ago called Transgender Active, that was sort of a summary of his more academic paper that he wrote for the Heritage Foundation, called Transgender Activists Are Seeking to Undermine Parental Rights. Let's look at so this is considered a firing offense now in a university in Idaho, which is a fairly conservative state, you might remember. It's one of the three, by the way. I posted something on my Facebook page about the states I've been to. It's one of the 3 states I haven't been to, but I would really like to go there. Radical feminists aspire to revolutionize society in 3 ways. Now, this is what this professor says, and I don't know if he's a Christian or not. He's a conservative, but he's in the university system. I believe he has tenure, and this is what he sees, he's observed from going on in culture. First, they seek to eliminate the different ways boys and girls are socialized so that they will come to have very similar characters and temperaments. Second, they seek to cultivate financial and emotional independence of women and children from the family, often by substituting the government in the role of the husband in a marriage. Third, they hope to erase sexual taboos, embracing new ways for individuals to achieve sexual satisfaction outside of monogamous procreative marriage. Winning public sanction, he says in his article, winning public sanction for same-sex marriage was the last great feminist victory. Same-sex marriage undermined sex roles within marriage. It put children ever more outside the purpose of marriage. It reinforced the idea that all means of sexual satisfaction are equal. Where will the radical feminist revolution roll to next? The new field for the rolling revolution with the greatest possibilities is transgender rights, especially as applied to children. Despite the accomplishments of radical feminism, the state has protected parents' rights to raise their children. Children, after all, seem rightly under the charge of their parents who provide personal care for their development. Transgender rights activists are seeking to abridge parental rights by elevating the independent choices of young children. Respecting the sexual and gender choices of ever younger children erodes parental rights and compromises the integrity of the family as an independent unit. Now, I know what most of you are thinking here is like, well, yeah, right? This can be seen in the Canadian province of Ontario, which passed a law allowing state agencies to prevent families that will not affirm a child's chosen gender identity from adopting or providing foster care to children. Children in Ontario can now make life-altering decisions before the age of consent against their parents' wishes. It's happening. I mean, somebody sent me a video. I tried to get a clip of it, but I just didn't have time this morning. It's very disturbing. It is a video of, let me see if I can remember, I can find the title of it. Somebody messaged to me on Facebook. I'm not gonna find it because there's too many of these things. I mean, and I appreciate people sending me information. Let me see if I can recap what it was. It was an animated video of two young boys. And the one boy is looking at, and they're showing this to like second, third graders. Okay? Now listen, when I was in second and third grade, what was important to me was, hitting a curveball. Okay? That's what I worried about. Riding my bike. So they show this video to these second and third grades, cute little kids. I don't know where they're from. And they're like, oh, that's so nice. Those boys are in love. And it's okay for them to make their choices. Two boys falling in love. And they're playing this and watching the reaction of these young children. And I have to confess to you, I see it and it's like, it's ripping my heart out as to where we are in our. I don't think I could show you anything more troubling than that. I think I could show you videos of people being beheaded that would be less disturbing than this was to me. Not because of how evil these little children are, but just these are just normal kids that go to schools like here in Columbus or other areas, and they're reacting like this. Well, yeah, that's normal. That's okay. 50 years ago or 60 years ago when I was that age, it didn't happen. The culture didn't hit you like that. And now we've seen there's this great controversy in this place. I think this is a picture of the Hollywood sign in 1978. And now it's sort of like, that's Hollywood now. It's falling apart. I saw this morning, we've seen the thing about Jeffrey Weinstein and all the things that he did. And frankly, I believe all of them. But everybody's saying this is just the tip of the iceberg. Quentin Tarantino comes out and says, well, I knew more and I probably should have said something. And Woody Allen even says, well, yeah, that's not. Woody Allen is saying that that's not so good. And it's really the tip of the iceberg, how people have, how things have progressed. Hugh Hefner died. Playboy magazine comes out and says their new playmate or centerfold, whatever they have, is a transgender person. And so for conservatives, it's like, yeah, what is going on? Here is this is from the state of Minnesota. Distributed this through their, and this is a revised and final edition, just came out a few weeks ago, September 25th, a toolkit for ensuring safe and supportive schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students. And they go through it, and you can find it online. Just type in the title of that, and you'll pull up a PDF of it. And one of the things down here is it says, For example, here it says restrooms, locker rooms, and hotel accommodations. Dress code above it, activities. Even on page 7 here, names, pronouns, and student records, how we're going to refer to these people. What pronouns do we refer to a little boy or little girl that... But do you understand that what Dr. Yenor from Boise State talked about in his article is actually coming true? I mean, he's just reporting the facts of what's out there, and the desire is to break apart these gender roles and undermine society and culture. You know what's funny? I say this stuff, and I never hear from people that say, you overstated it. Except occasionally, somebody complained last week that I had overstated concerns about the Shack and Dan Brown's books. And I told the person that they needed to reset their discernment meter if they thought everything in the Shack was okay, or it was just a nice story. And I said, you fell for it. But look at what it says in this toolkit for Minnesota student schools throughout Minnesota. Hotel accommodations. I'm just going to read, quote, this is a picture of the page. If students are to be separated based on gender when traveling for athletic, educational, or cultural activities, these are school kids. School officials should allow a transgender or gender nonconforming student the opportunity to room with peers who match the student's gender identity unless the transgender or gender nonconforming student requests otherwise. At times, any student may have specific needs for privacy, and the school can make arrangements based on that student's wishes. But do you see that it's on the nonconforming student's desires and wishes that control? This Boise State professor continues, our core values as a school, and I think this is from the Minnesota thing. Our core values as a school include the statement that collegiality, caring, tolerance. Oh, no, he's writing about Boise State. No, I'm sorry. No, I got it right. This is the Boise State president, Boise State University president's response to what this professor wrote, which was factually true. Now, he may have reached conclusions that were not acceptable. Our core values as a school, the president says, including the statement, and this could be any university in America right now that said this, or Canada, or certainly Europe, collegiality, caring, tolerance, civility, and respect of faculty, staff, students, and our external partners are ways of embracing diverse backgrounds, traditions, ideas, and experiences. As has been pointed out by several people in their communications with me, the particular language employed in the piece is inconsistent with that value. I can show you a video, again, I don't have time, you can look it up, of students at a university in California. It was a Republican group meeting in the library, and they were verbally assaulted by the Antifa types. And during the conversation, which somebody put up, it's about a 12-minute video, the person said, why don't you just sit down and we'll talk about this? To which the left-wing person said, your mere existence is intolerable to me. Well, that's tolerant, isn't it? That's collegial. And the university person was like, in the library, like, well, you know, you're disrupting the library. And the left-wing people are like, we don't care. Because these people have no right to be even here talking about this. They're racist, they're, you know, phobic, and all this other stuff. It's crazy. This Colorado baker, now under fire on the not making a cake for a same-sex wedding, is now been approached to make a cake for a celebration of Satan. They will never let this man go. Now, look, let me suggest something. I think I may have suggested this before. we need to be creative in the way that we respond to this. They're trying to force him to make a statement, right? Do you agree with that? So what I think people in these kind of creative arts, photography, cake making, that type of thing, where you put some artistic thing into it, ought to say, look, if you come to me for a wedding, I will only make a cake in a certain way. The cake will include this. It will include a picture of a man and a woman on top of the cake, and it will include in the box and on cards and everything that will be on the napkins that go with the cake, the words of Jesus Christ. And he answered and he said unto them, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And say, look, I'll make you the cake. You can pay me your money. I take their money. They can't spend it on something else, but say, I only make this kind of cake for a wedding. Because you can't force me to do something otherwise. And I don't know. Somebody ought to try it. And for the Satan cake, it ought to be something like this on the cake. Make it look, with 3D printing, and there's probably like a 3D thing for, icing. For as much as then the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also likewise took part of the same, and that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. And say, my cakes that want to celebrate Satan all come with this on the cake. And if you want to buy that, I'll sell it to you. Here's the price. I'll take your money. But I don't make it any other way. And I don't know. So I don't know. I don't know, to be honest with you. It's, I'm a lawyer, and I don't know if it's bad advice or good. It's certainly, somebody ought to try it and see what happens. So this week like I said, take their money, and then you can do something good with it. Donald Trump, Newsweek magazine. Donald Trump to speak at hate group's annual event, a first for a president. Michelle Bachmann, a friend of mine, spoke at this, and she gave a pretty good talk. She clearly gave the gospel and everything in that talk. So I'm grateful for what she did, and I think that needs to be applauded. But this is based on the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is neither poor nor concerned about the law, labeled Family Research Council, Tony Perkins' organization, a hate group. And so Trump goes and speaks at their Family Values Coalition meeting, and that's a hate group, and he's speaking at a hate group. And here's this is the Southern Poverty Law Center page on Family Research Council, Value Voters Summit, Whose Value? And it says, down here it says, the FRC is an organization that has relentlessly vilified LGBT people, portraying them as sick, vile, incestuous, violent, perverted, and a danger to children and the nation. Because of its demonizing lies about the LGBT, they don't even say it right, it's LGBTQ, don't they, and a bunch of other letters. What do they have against Q people? It has been named a hate group by the SPLC. In fact, it was this identification that led a guy to saw it on the website, and he went and he tried to, remember, he had little Chick-fil-A sandwiches with the names of all the people at the Family Research Council that he was going to kill. And he went to kill them in Washington, D.C. But they're a hate group, but Southern Poverty Law Center isn't. And the reason I say that is, at the Values Coalition, one of the reasons why Newsweek wrote the article and said, this is a hate group, look at how bad this is because they passed out a brochure about the health effects of same-sex relations. You can't even talk about that. That's hate to even mention that there might be a difference. So, it's always kind of interesting to see how these things work out from a timing perspective. This week, published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, oral human papilloma, the virus, the HPV virus, differences in prevalence between sexes in concordance with genital human papillomavirus infection. And it reaches a conclusion. And then this was picked up in the New York Times and put in the New York, so the published part of the New York Times, on their website in the paper, and it says, the risk of infection was higher for smokers, for people who have had multiple sex partners, and what do they say? Dare I say it, to risk getting banned? I'm quoting the New York Times. I'm quoting the New York Times. I'm quoting the New York Times, and for men who have sex with men. Frequent oral sex also increased the risk. Now, will the Southern Poverty Law Center label the New York Times a hate group for conveying what the science says? No, they won't. You know they won't. That's a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious. Let's see here. Well, let's talk about Israel. And so, well, let's talk about geopolitics. There was an interesting meeting in Russia this week. And during the course, there was a panel. It was in Sochi, Russia, and I was watching part of it. I mean, Putin is, he's masterful at this. I mean, he's actually kind of funny at times, and I don't trust him. But this is from the Jerusalem Post this morning. Alarm in Russia as U.S. becomes the unpredictable superpower. So they're talking about, Russia got what they wanted. They interfered in the election. They got Donald Trump. Now they're concerned because they don't know what Trump's going to do. And so they've kind of hurt themselves. Here's what part of the article says. Russia may have got what it wished for with the election of U.S. President Donald Trump, but almost a year later, Moscow's foreign policy community shows more signs of alarm than triumph. Russia's ability to influence the debate in Washington, let alone reset a damaged relationship, has vanished, according to current and former policymakers who gathered last week at the annual Valdai Club conference in Sochi. With an official investigation underway into alleged Russian meddling in last year's U.S. presidential election, Russian diplomats have become too toxic to even talk to in Washington, said one official, speaking at a closed panel under so-called Chatham House rules. Russia has become a meme for Americans' internal political debate, just at the moment that the U.S. has become a biggest factor for uncertainty in the world. No one can deliver such turbulence as the U.S. That has left Russian leaders feeling confused, apprehensive, and even helpless after a brief period of optimism that followed Trump's inauguration. Meanwhile, Moscow's own willingness to play risky games is much less than before. In Syria, he said Russia's generals are pressing for an exit from active conflict in Ukraine. Russia recently proposed a limited deployment of UN troops, peacekeepers. Russian warnings of a potential war between superpowers triggered by events in smaller countries, as in World War I, were louder this year than at previous meetings and dominate the organization's annual report. The risk of conflict on the Korean Peninsula and fraying arms control realities loom large. And this comes at a time when I mentioned this, that the Heritage Foundation put out their military index, and it said, the state of readiness of the American military, it's not the quality of people there, it's a quantitative thing. We're just not ready for big battles. And so when there's a lot of rhetoric going on about going into war in Korea and that type of thing, we just don't have the manpower that we need. We're wearing out our equipment. We've been at war in Afghanistan for 16 years now, or going on 16 years. That seems to be heating up again, sending more troops in. They've been rotated through there many times, and it's hard. It's wearing people out. They just recalled 1,000 retired Air Force people because they didn't have pilots for the planes that we can get into the air. It's a very troubling thing. And do we have the money to do it? Listen to what was also said at this meeting in Sochi, or about this meeting in Sochi. Foreign Ministry Sergei Lavrov of Russia said he thought Trump still wants to do the right thing with Russia, but is constrained by a rigid establishment. One panel celebrated the demise of the liberal Western-dominated global order and looked forward to what might replace it. When two former State Department officials in a closed session lauded strong U.S. institutions and the adults in Trump's administration for limiting his worst instincts, a Russian official saw that as part of a conspiracy to deny the election result. Everybody's got a conspiracy theory now, it seems like. That political inertia isn't a strength, according to the Russian official, who described the Russians and Democrats as two wings of the same party protecting the interests of an elite. So you find these little nuggets of reality and truth that are buried in these stories. This is a story that just came out. I really didn't have time to look at it that much. This is from the Washington Institute, and improving the quality of U.S. Middle East policy. But essentially what it says is, look, we've got a major problem here with Russia and where they're at and what impact that's going to have. We know they're moving in there. And the Euphrates River has long been considered to be a barrier to invasions from the east into the Middle East. Now, that ought to sort of ring some bells with you about the Euphrates River and how it plays a part in the chapters of Revelation. And the Euphrates drying up, why? To prepare the ways of the kings of the east. And what they're finding now is that with modern technology and stuff, even when it's not dried up, although its flow is less, because Turkey's built some big dams that can essentially shut off all the flow to the through Syria to down into Iraq. They could stop the flow of the Euphrates River. And that has some Bible prophecy implications. But this first part of this article says this. It's titled, Russia Crosses the Euphrates, Implications. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced today that Syrian government troops crossed the east bank of the Euphrates River using a Russian pontoon bridge and amphibious vehicles. This is from about a month ago. Although the situation remains fluid, the crossing by what appear to be elements of Syria's Iranian-trained and Russian-supported Fifth Corps has deep implications for the U.S. policy on the Islamic State, the Syria war, and Iran. And it goes on. You can look it up and read it. It's from September 18th of 2017. So we have all these things, and this, this is where a lot of the Bible describes things will be happening in the end times. Guterres went to see Trump this week. They had a meeting. There was a big article in the Jerusalem Post. I think this is from this morning or Friday. Suggestions for solving the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. And how do you solve that dispute? So everybody was all excited. Oh, there's reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, and they're going to be in peace. And that's going to bring everybody to the table, right? Well, here's Jason Greenblatt. He's their U.S. official after Greenblatt meetings in Cairo. Peace agreement will take time. So it's going to take somebody that's going to do this. Here's a article. This is a clip from this morning's, today's Jerusalem Post. Greenblatt issued a statement last week laying out the U.S. position on the Hamas-Fatah reconciliation agreement, saying that if Hamas is to be part of a Palestinian government, it must recognize Israel, commit itself to nonviolence, and disarm. Hamas' answer was not long in coming, with Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, saying on Thursday in response that the discussion is no longer about recognizing Israel, but about wiping Israel out, and that Hamas would disarm when Satan enters paradise. Wow. So it doesn't sound like they're willing to recognize Israel. Just a guess. Israel this week, there was some aircraft or there was some shells that landed in the Golan. They went and struck the where that occurred, just over the border. Here's from the Golan looking into Israel. This morning they're talking about the fact that this might actually be, it might have been intentional, that they were shooting these things in here to provoke something happening so they can justify an invasion or something of that sort. These are Iranian-backed, Iranian-controlled troops and Hezbollah and other things right there on the border of Israel. It's a very interesting thing. I'm going to divert here for just a moment. And, okay. Brian Bayless sent this to me this morning. As you can see, I've been under a crunch, and so my slides are a bit out of order. So here is, where am I trying to? I had it right here. Well, Brian can send it to you. Contact him. Brian, it's about the young millennials being into astrology and the occult. I had an article right here. It's the next slide. Is that right? Oh, there it is. Next slide. Why millennials are ditching religion for witchcraft and astrology. And it talked about the fact that this is a growing thing. I saw some articles this week, and it's getting close to Christmas because the Halloween stores are all open, right? This was not like this when I was younger. I'm old enough I can say that now with some certainty. And I read someplace today an article by someone who said, my kids, they're like 7, 8 years old, they are totally into Halloween. This is like the biggest thing of the year. Churches participate in it. And so what millennials are looking for is they're looking for an experience of some kind. Something that makes them feel like they've experienced God. Now, one of the manifestations of this, and this is an article in BuzzFeed, Bethel Church in Reading. They have conference after conference. They have a church here. I don't know how big it is. I know when I was in Sacramento, they had just planted a church in the Sacramento area, and within 2 months, they were running about 2,000 on Sunday nights. They're very slick, Jesus culture, and their music. They have conferences, and they teach people. In this article in BuzzFeed, I wish it was written by somebody in the church, and there are some Facebook groups and some websites that deal with this a lot. Bethel Church and Christianity, I think, is a Facebook group. There's also an NAR for New Apostolic Reformation group that deals with these issues quite a bit. But they don't get the traffic because people don't understand what's going on at Bethel Church. And I think we need to probably do a whole series of things that are going on. But they go to this school of spirituality. They go out in parking lots to heal people in wheelchairs and that type of thing. And the people in Redding, California, where this is located, it's a town of about 80 or 90,000 people, are getting a little bit tired of it because these groups are always confronting them everywhere. And they call it the Bethel School of Spirituality. What do you think the Bethel students call it? Christian Hogwarts, which is the school in Harry Potter series where you went to learn to be a witch. And they just think, it's okay, we compare it to that and everything's fine. There is coming up is a global prophetic summit can't remember when this is. It's going to have all of the, what you would call the new apostolic, the NAR people, although they're now trying to distance themselves from the NAR because people are criticizing NAR, so they're changing the name to like New Apostolic Christianity. So they're going to fool us by doing that. And they have all these people. And they're having a big conference in Kansas City this week. Starts on Tuesday through Thursday, called Kairos 2017, Unity and Revival. And the speakers include Shay On, Kenneth Copeland, and this Catholic Cardinal Donardo from Galveston, from the Houston area. And about 3 years ago, I did a video with Tim Worth called Stream of Ecumenism. You can look it up on YouTube. It's in a couple places. Just type in my name and Stream of Ecumenism. I don't know how many people have watched it. I know it's less than usually watch the prophecy update. But I went through there and I showed how there was this coming unity that was going to take place between these New Apostolic Reformation types and the Catholic Church. And other people have been talking about this forever. Roger Oakland has done some great videos and books on it. Other people have done things on it. And I took what had happened at the Kenneth Copeland Believers Conference down in Texas with about 2,000 pastors in Fort Worth, and how he brought in Tony Palmer, who had met with the Pope. And what did Tony Palmer say? The Luther's protest is over, is what he said. Tony Palmer, South African. I understand he knew David Nathan, who'll be speaking here in 2 weeks. And he died in a motorcycle accident a few months after he went to Kenneth Copeland's conference. After Kenneth Copeland and John and Carol Arnott, James and Betty Robeson, some people from the World Evangelical Alliance, Tony Palmer, they all went and had dinner with the Pope, and they're all excited. This is what's going to happen. And I reported there that they were going to try to do more about this unity thing in 2017. And so I'm going to play just a little bit of Kenneth Copeland, not because I like Kenneth Copeland, but I want you to hear his own words as to what he said about this conference in Kansas City that starts in 2 days that he'll be speaking at. And Shay On, by the way, he's from Pasadena, and you might remember him. He was one of the guys who went to Lakeland, Florida about 9 years ago when Todd Bentley's crusade was going on, and laid hands on him and told him he was going to have this really great ministry. It was going to change the world. And what happened within a month, Todd Bentley, ran off with one of the ministry workers, left his wife and children. And of course, he's back in ministry and still, I think he was in Pakistan this week, spreading whatever it is he talks about. And he came to that church up on Sawmill Road here in Columbus, and he had hundreds of people showed up. So don't tell me that the guy doesn't have influence anymore. And here's the guys who blessed him and prophesied over him, having a big conference. And here's a little bit about Kenneth Copeland talking about that. I'm just going to jump in the middle of the video because I didn't have time to edit it.
Please put this date on your calendar. This year, October the 24th through the 26th in Kansas City. Hallelujah. The most important event that has to do with the outpouring And this mighty thing that has been loosed in the kingdom of God in the earth. The most important thing that has happened in the body of Christ happened some years ago. The biggest church split in history. Amen. When the Catholic Church split, you know the story.
Now, can I suggest something? Because he says I'm operating in the Spirit all the time. You know, I think he's struggling for words because God's trying to keep him from speaking. That's my personal opinion. It doesn't work, but listen.
The beginning of the protesting church. Now you really stop and think about it. Among the people of love, we're called protesters. We've been protesting for 500 years, baby. Yeah, that's been 500 years ago. Now that brother, hey, that's a church split, brother. I mean, that's the church split of all church splits. Really. Now, October the 31st, 1999, representatives of the Catholic and the Lutheran churches gathered in Augsburg, Germany, and signed a joint declaration on the subject of justification. And so 500 years of arguments, misunderstandings, and sometimes wars began to give way to reconciliation and recognition of the gifts of the Holy Spirit as placed within the body of Christ.
Well, he goes on, and he goes on to talk about, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a minister, okay? He's been a minister for a long time. I think he's getting close to 80. And he's been one of the biggest proponents of word faith. You know, name it, claim it. And guess what? He's looking older every year. I mean, doesn't that tell you something about the basics of what he talks about? That if you just believe it, you'll be healed? The evidence is right there in the mirror, Kenneth Copeland, and he brags about being a billionaire. He does. He has a couple jets, big ranch, properties, and he's been a minister. You understand the inconsistency there? And people follow after, obviously they follow after him and give him money. And he takes it. And he's always got some other little trinket to sell. But he doesn't understand the whole basis of the Reformation. And he just glosses it over as a church split. It wasn't a church split, it was a reformation of error that had crept into the church over centuries. But everything's going to be fine. You can find the whole video on Vimeo, and it's a continuation. And look, and he says, we're doing this. This is significant that we're doing it this year because this is the 500th anniversary of the split, and we're reconciling and getting rid of it. And it's 50 years after Jerusalem is reunified, and it's 70 years after Israel has been is back in the land, and all this other stuff, and it's bad. So I have one more subject I'm going to talk about. Brian Schrager of JerusalemJournal.net and the Chaim Report, CHAIM. I would say it like it's supposed to be said, but somebody said when I say it that way, it sounds like a cat coughing up a fur ball. So CHAIM, the Chaim Report, Chaim Report, and there was a thing in Jerusalem this week called the Christian Media Summit. I had a lot of good people there. Bill Caney was there, Brian, Chris Mitchell from CBN, Dexter Van Zyl, other people. Dexter has had written, he's from Camera, CAMERA.org. He had written a good article a couple weeks ago about some of these people associated with the Christ at the Checkpoint Conference. Camera also put out a book called Indoctrinating Our Youth about how people have been brought into our culture and schools and that type of thing to tell them that the Palestinian Israel thing is not really, you're not getting the straight scoop if you go to a church that would support something called Christian Zionism. There's a good article the other day in the Jerusalem Post about Christian Zionism and the Balfour Declaration, about how there were people back in the late 1800s that helped, that before the Zionist movement started, that talked about Israel being restored to the land, the Jewish people, establishing a homeland. And this was part of how Bible prophecy was going to play. This is in the main editorial page of the Jerusalem Post the other day. It goes on to talk about the fact that Christian Zionists are supportive of the state of Israel. But this narrative, and that they had influence to the point where Lord Balfour and the British government wrote the Balfour Declaration that, yeah, there should be a homeland for the Jewish people in their historic biblical homeland. And that was 100 years ago, November 2nd, 1917, right near the end of World War I, as things were changing in the Middle East. Turkey was being driven out as part of the battles that took place led by the British forces. So the point is, there was a and this narrative thing has been very important, how people have been taught. I did have an opportunity, I think it's been, I would say a year ago, but it might have been, it was a little over a year ago. I met with some other pastors at a meeting up in Cleveland, and they had one of the deputy consul general from the state of Israel there. And he said, what do we do? Now, my suggestion was, and I'm not suggesting that because I said this, that somebody did something about it, okay? I'm just saying is that one of the things that concerned me was that the narrative is never, the right narrative of what's going on in the Middle East is not told, and you got to change the narrative. And part of that was because when we went to Israel 6 years ago, Pam sat next to somebody who would do something like this on the plane over to Israel, and she was on our flight back about 11 days later. Part of these Peace Now activists that go and they protest, they're against the state of Israel, they go up in the West Bank, and they're taken by people, by the Palestinians, they're taken to these refugee camps, and they show the squalor and everything. Nobody takes them down to Ramallah or Bethel or places that Pam and I went, where there's, if you didn't know you were in Israel, you would think you had stumbled into a nice neighborhood in Beverly Hills with the homes and everything. And it's all Palestinian area, Palestinian control, Palestinians live there. And it's not the squalor that they force people to live in these refugee camps. But, here's a protest that's going on in Hebron right now by Peace Now. And they're having a big fight, and protesters were going because the narrative's wrong. So the suggestion that I made, and I think others made, is you got to change the narrative. You got to change the way people are telling the story. Let Peace Now come and make them go on a tour on the way to Nablus or someplace where there's a big refugee camp. Take them to Bethel or and show them the big homes, or take them to the mall in Ramallah and show them that they're not getting the straight story. You got to change the narrative. And so they had this Christian Media Summit, which I think was in part to change the narrative. One of the speakers was Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's just a little bit of what he had to say.
You are joining us as we celebrate 50 years since the Holy City was liberated and united. 50 years of religious freedom for all. You know that because you walk around, you go to the holy sites, you go to the churches, others go to the mosques, and you know this is a free city. I want you also to join us in looking forward to the day when the embassies of all your countries move to Jerusalem. Israel has no better friends, I mean that, no better friends in the world than the Christian communities around the world. And Israel is the one country in a vast region where Christians not only survive, they thrive. You know the truth about Israel's history and the truth about our commitment to freedom. Freedom is under challenge all the time. And I think it scored a big victory the other day. I want to thank President Trump for his courageous speech outlining a new course against Iran, the enemy of our free civilization. Iran is a threat to the entire world, but today I want to focus on Iran's war against Christians. As you all know, Christians are brutally persecuted in the Islamic Republic.
Well, you can go and you can find out more. There's a website that's set up about the Christian Media Summit in Jerusalem 2017. This is Brian's article that he wrote in the Jerusalem Post that was on Thursday or Friday. I think it was on Thursday in the Jerusalem Post, half-page article, pretty nice, pretty prominent. And he talks about the things that talked about. And one of the things that Brian talked about in that article was that this summit will help change the narrative because people aren't getting the right story. Things get distorted in the news. And Netanyahu went on, he talked about the fact that, he criticized this fake reconciliation deal. He talked about the, how much hope there was about this, that there were these things going on that had happened, like Palestine was admitted, even though it's not a country, was admitted to Interpol. And there's some question as to whether that would be a good thing or not. I don't think it's a good thing. There was a International Parliamentary Union meeting in St. Petersburg, Russia this week. And here is the Kuwait ambassador. And to summarize, essentially, well, you can see a little bit of what he says here. And essentially what he does is he gets up there and he says, we have Israel people here and they're baby killers and child killers, the most dangerous form of terrorism. That's what this brutal occupier represents. And I say to him, the representative, that he goes by the proverb, if you do not feel shame, then you do as you please. You should pack your bags and get out of the hall. You should pack your bags and get out of the hall after you saw the reactions of the world's honorable parliament. Get out of the hall right now if you have an atom of dignity. You occupiers, you killers of children. And they got up and left. So then there was an Israeli member of the Knesset there. It'll be a little hard to hear. I want you just to kind of listen. I put some of her words there. Listen to what happened. She got in there, and I like these Jewish women, especially these settler women. They're like forces of nature, and this is one of them. Well, here's what she said. Her, I don't remember her name right offhand, but here you'll see her speak.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether this is a bench. Countries like Pakistan, Syria, Iran will tell us what it is to preserve human rights, I don't know whether I should laugh or I should cry. The goal of this organization is to maintain democracy, to create cooperation between the countries. Just to let you know, in the Palestinian Authority, for the past 10 years, there was no election.
Well, anyway, this goes on for quite a while. And she just says, I thought this organization was about human rights. And you want them to release, you want us to release convicted terrorists and murderers from prison? I thought you cared about children. It's a joke. And as she went on, and you really can't hear it because as she's speaking here, I want more time, and they're pounding on the desks and everything. These are all, and you can see them in the background when they're doing it. It's Islamic. You see the guy up here, Pakistan and some other countries, and they want him out. And she goes, I have 4 minutes. I'm allowed 4 minutes, and they tell her essentially to shut up. It's crazy. There was also a report. I don't know if this led to Netanyahu's comments or not, but reference the National Review, Today's Martyrs for Christianity, and it references a report, Persecuted and Forgotten, by Aids to the Church in Need, a report on Christians oppressed for their faith in 2015 to 2017. And it makes these things, and a lot of it tracks with Prime Minister Netanyahu in his brief comments to the Christian Media Summit. Christians are the victims of at least 75% of all religiously motivated violence and oppression. In Iraq, figures for the Christian population showed a decline from 275,000 in mid-2015 to below 200,000 2 years later, and the trends seem to be accelerating. Christians in Syria and Iraq have fallen victims to genocide. This is some priest exploring a place where some genocide had occurred. In Aleppo, there were, a few years ago, 150,000 Christians believed to be living there. Now there are 35,000. That's a drop of 75% in just a few years. And look, there's two things to say about this. It fits the prophetic scenario perfectly. But I also have friends that I won't share their names, but they actually go to Iraq, and they go to where the Kurds are in Iraq and Syria and share the gospel. And there is a bit of a revival going on there. And we know that there's these great promises in the scriptures about the Arab states and what happens to them prophetically. And there will be a lot of people that will get saved and turn to faith in the Messiah and Jesus Christ. But in the interim, there's this, this is the hotbed of conflict against Jews. So it's, but it's prophetic. I mean, and you see where the countries are where the most persecution is taking place around the world. North Korea is particularly bad. It's usually Islamic and communist countries. That's usually where the persecution is the worst. And this report has a lot of details about the different persecution and oppression of Christians that are taking place. For example, in North Korea, Christians convicted are routinely sent to political internment camps where they experience extrajudicial killing, torture, starvation, forced abortion, and sexual violence. Unspeakable atrocities against Christians include, as I said, starvation, forced abortions, and sexual violence. There are reports of faithful Christians being hung on crosses over a fire and others being crushed under a steamroller. We're really blessed that we've been immune from that. I don't know that it'll continue though, as I understand Bible prophecy. In Saudi Arabia, they said if Saudi Arabia had got a minus sign, which means it's really not changed. And the reason it's not changed, as the report says, it really couldn't get any worse than it already is in Saudi Arabia for Christians who are killed and that sort of thing. Same way with Turkey and Syria. And it goes through all the countries, and most of them are in the Middle East or communist countries where this is going. They confiscate property and that type of thing. At the same time all this is going on, Germany is now censoring speech, again proving the axiom that Germany, when it comes to geopolitics, Germany is pretty much always wrong. And this is a great article in Gates Institute about the courts are even going in and rewriting history. Because I don't know if I remember if I shared it or not. A person's been sentenced to 6 months in jail in Germany for sharing on his blog or Facebook a picture of the Hajj Imam al-Husseini, the mufti that controls the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Back in the 1930s and 40s, he was a very close compatriot of Adolf Hitler. And they have a picture of the mufti and Hitler together, and he put it up on his blog. And they said, you can't do that. That's inciting hatred against the Islamic religion. But it was a historical fact. So what are the courts saying is, you can't talk about history. I mean, is it any wonder why millennials and young people are totally confused? They don't know, and they're told you can't make a judgment or anything like this. By the way, tomorrow night, up in Cleveland and Broadview Heights, and then in Cincinnati on Tuesday night, the local ACT chapters, ACT of Bridget Gabriel's group, ACT for America, ACT for America, there's an ACT Cleveland group, there's an ACT Columbus group, there's an ACT Cincinnati group. I think it goes under Southwest Ohio, ACT Southwest Ohio. Anyway, in Cleveland on Monday night, I think it starts at 7, and then down in Cincinnati on Tuesday night is a meeting, and then Phil Haney and Jim Simpson are going to be talking about some of this, about the Red-Green Alliance, communism and Islam and how they work together. I think the group in Columbus on Tuesday night will be live streaming what's going on in Cincinnati. So you can look that up. Is it Monday night? Oh, they're live streaming the Cleveland event. Okay, so I'm going to try down and go see Phil. So you might want to watch it, but he did a great full show interview on Thursday or Wednesday on Secure Freedom Radio. You should check that out. But, so this is what's going on. Let's see. They're meeting with Israel and the Netanyahu and the Russian defense minister, and he just said, we got to put a stop to this Iranian thing. I don't even have time to talk about this investigation the millions of dollars funneled to the Clinton Foundation by Russia for purchasing uranium, and they're concerned about $100,000 that Paul Manafort got. And the people that would have been making the determinations, by the way, on whether the Clinton Foundation should be prosecuted are the same ones. Mueller, who was head of the FBI at that time, and I guess decided not to prosecute, is the one leading the prosecution now against the Trump thing. The whole thing, it just, to say it stinks to high heaven is unreal. I used this slide here a couple of years ago. This is in 2006 when they had the first Lebanon War, which I think Caroline Glick refers to as the first Iranian war against Hezbollah. That was the number of missiles that Hezbollah had at that time. This is what they thought they had a year ago, and it's probably 150,000 now and not 120,000. To show you the difference, to show you what's going on with Iran, Persia, on the northern border of Israel. Naftali Bennett. I don't have, this is a long clip. You can find it on the Arutz Shiva website. And essentially what he says is, we've got this Iranian problem, we've got to deal with this Iranian problem. And what Iran is doing is, under the guise of this agreement, it's not so much that they're developing a single nuclear weapon, it's they're developing all of the infrastructure and technology and stuff so that when the agreement ends, they can push a button and they can have hundreds of nuclear weapons very, very quickly.
What happened was the
and they've got the money and they're building the infrastructure to do that, and say, oh, we're complying with the agreement, and it's a bad deal, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said. So this is Naftali Bennett speaking at the, and you know, if it happens to Iran, it's going to happen to these other countries. The dominoes will begin to fall. And Naftali Bennett was great. You can find that at Arutz Shiva. A few years back, I guess it was just a year ago, July, there was this report that Mahmoud Abbas said at a meeting of the European Parliament in Brussels. He claimed that Israeli rabbis were calling for Israel to poison Palestinian water. It was a blood libel. It was a lie. And I'm going to close with this. This is just going to take a couple more minutes. And if you had any idea what you could see here, it's very important that we change the narrative. Let me just add this in front. This is a page from Los Angeles Unified School District. They have teacher and service days. I always know when it's an in-service day because I have to drive by a big high school. And Friday, I just breezed by because there was nobody there. I think every kid that goes out of high school has a car, nicer than I have, by the way. But I'm not bitter about that. But they never let you out of the neighborhoods. And I'm like, I pay the taxes so you can have that nice school. But they don't let you out. And so I don't leave between certain hours because I just have to sit there and wait for 15 minutes. But in the in-service day in Los Angeles, California, which has a pretty significant Jewish population, they had this in-service day, and one of the subjects was Palestine-Israel. The speaker to teach people the narrative about how they should look at Palestine-Israel. And here's some pages from that handout. Palestine, Israel, and the Arab-Israeli conflict, a primer by a guy named Jeff Cooper. And I'm telling you, it's a bunch of left-wing pack of lies that he says in here. Because why? Because he's trying to control the narrative. So you have Abbas going to the parliament in Brussels and saying this blood libel, they're trying to poison our water. You have in California, in the school district, they're putting on seminars on in-service days to teach people what the left-wing media wants them to hear. So they had a panel at the Christian Media Summit, and on it was Caroline Glick, Christopher Mitchell from CBN on the left, and then Judy, can't remember her name, from Haaretz, which is a left-wing magazine, newspaper in Israel. It's sort of associated with the New York Times, so you can imagine their political bent, which she claims is a Zionist thing. And so Caroline had a question about Abbas and what he said, and this is kind of interesting because I enjoyed the exchange. So Caroline will start off asking the question.
Why don't I start actually with Judy? There was to talk just a little bit about the narrative, I want to just lead it with an observation. I think it was last year, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas gave a speech to the European Union where he accused Israel of poisoning the wells in the Palestinian Authority. And this statement by him was surprisingly not newsworthy. That is, the newspapers of the West, the mass media organizations of the West really did not highlight this statement. And I'm wondering if you can explain, if you have thoughts from your perspective from Haaretz, why something like this wouldn't have been highlighted or generate significant coverage. What is it about the nature of the coverage of Israel that would, in your view, dictate that this not be a highlighted story?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I think what you're trying to get me to say is because the media is biased against Israel.
I'm not getting you to say anything. I asked you a
No,
question.
I mean, it seems like that's where you're leading with this question. So
always
I
said I
am
would have been
not
a
going
great
to
lawyer.
take the bait. And if you want to ask me, do I think that the foreign media is biased against Israel, I think that I would say generally there are exceptions. Generally, I think it's pretty fair. Do I think that most foreign reporters in Israel are opposed to the occupation or are opposed to the Israeli government because the Israeli government promotes the occupation and supports the occupation? I think that is probably true. But I think if you took a survey of Israeli reporters, you would find that the vast majority as well are also opposed to the occupation and also don't support the government's position on it.
So no, that's not the question I asked at all.
But I know that's not the question, but I knew where you were getting with your question. So that's my answer.
Okay, so your answer is it wasn't highlighted that Mahmoud Abbas resonated or actually declared allegiance to an ancient blood libel against Jews, saying they were poisoning wells because the international media opposes the occupation. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't know what the answer is, but I think you're raising that as an example of a bias against Israel when I don't believe there's a bias.
So you don't see that it's bias. I don't mean.
I mean,
to,
you're bringing one incident.
Okay.
You're bringing one incident, and we can probably show incidents on the other side.
Could you bring one on the other side, please?
Not right now, but I'm sure I could find incidents. Let me just
Okay,
think
then
about it.
let's open up the question to the other panelists.
Well, I'd like to go to dinner with the two of them and just, I'll buy and watch, because I think it would be rather entertaining. But you see, the problem with somebody on the left is they don't want to talk about reality and real facts and what happened. And you see this in America. I mean, what's going on in Israel is the same thing that goes on here. People have lost touch with reality and the ability to reason. Lots more to talk about. Let me suggest one thing for Brian. He always needs support. I know we help support him here at church. With some funds. He also could use people that would share the Heim Report on a daily basis. You can get in contact with me or Brian. His email is there. It's in the article. And you can find it on my timeline on Facebook. Or get me through the church email, and I'll send you his email so you can contact him to share the thing in different Facebook groups on a daily basis to get the message out. Because there's a lot more going on there each day than we have an opportunity. So he just asks that you take 10 or 15 minutes each day to share things in Facebook groups that you belong to, so the message gets out. So if you could help him out, that would be greatly appreciated. We'll continue this next week. I'm going to try to do an interview with Brian this week about more details about the Christian Media Summit. Some of the things are going on, so you might look for that on our YouTube channel if I have time to fit it in with work and everything that's going on. So it is it really is an incredible time to be alive. It's amazing what's going on a daily basis. I feel very inadequate in trying to convey to you the significance of the things that we see unfolding culturally, politically, and particularly in the Middle East and with Israel. It seems to be really ramping up and accelerating week by week. So I appreciate you all for listening, and let's pray and we'll get out of here. Father, thanks so much for, again, the grace that you've shown to all of us through the death of your Son, Jesus Christ, on the cross for our sins, and in letting us know what's going to happen so that we're not distressed. I pray, Father, for the Christians around the world that are under severe persecution, that you would give them grace and peace and strength to stand as strong, bold, faithful witnesses. I pray for those people who, at great risk to their lives, go to the Middle East to share the gospel with these groups, that their ministry will be fruitful, that they'll see the evidence of that you'll protect them and provide for them the funds that they need to do that, so that we can see those people come to the Lord as the prophets prophesied thousands of years ago, and that they will be there in the kingdom. Just bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.